Okay, so now we say, well, okay, now what? How do we move on? How do we move forward? What is the next step, if you will, in advocacy? So now that we have talked about what's next, all right, we have to know where we are now before to know what we're going to do. So what are we right now? When we look at this responsibility diagram over here, when we take a look on right here, when we see the Algerian government's responsibility, and when we see civil society, academia, experts, human rights defenders, and public, and you see I was quite detailed here. There's a reason for that. Within this advocacy, there are times where you need the activists, and there are times when you need the academia, the experts. Currently, we are in need of both. We are in need of subject matter experts who can help us create action plans. What are the blueprints? Noise making is partly the part of advocacy that gets the most attention, but it's not the part that really renders the most action. It's really the shadow work, the work in the back, the legalities, the things of that nature that really produces results. And that's what we need. We need action plan. We need to produce results. It is not, again, fancy pictures or meetings or general talks in the UN. It is what is producing. All of that plays a role. I'm not undermining it, but that is not the complete portion, nor is it the grand portion. So what is left here is recommendation in the ciphering section, recommendation and the ciphering selection of the 291. There is a reality that a country cannot stop its functions and just take on the UPR recommendations and do those. So with that keeping in mind, it really has to go through numerous filtering. Who are responsible? Generally, what is supposed to happen, and again, this is not our procedure, this is the way we choose, or this is an idea, this is how the process works, is that Algerian government and civil society have to work together to decipher. Some recommendations that were made are not culturally appropriate, for example, for Algerians, and it's not what Algerians want. They go contrary to laws. So there are different things that, of course, we have to speak about. Us as civil society, academia, experts, what we're supposed to do at this present time is communicate which recommendations we want. And you cannot simply communicate by saying, oh, the law's on this, oh, freedom of speech. No. People have to do their homework. Again, this is why we don't need at this present moment simply activists. We need high academics. We need our attorneys. We need our subject matter experts to not only produce the cipher and give that information, but to actually say, how do we do that? How do we actually produce the blueprints to the action plan? How does this impact inside of Algeria? And of course, for all of this, the government has to be willing and the civil society has to be willing to do this. But in theory, this is what's supposed to happen. Again, keep in mind, noise making is not the biggest portion of advocacy. Fancy, nice pictures that go around, nice rhetoric that incites emotions is not what frees people. There's really the background of it. There's the work, there's the legality, there's the statistics, there's the deciphering, and that's what we are missing. Not that we're missing, but we don't have as much of it as we need to. But the good part is, with this type of things, now we can start to move forward. Now our advocacy really gets organized. And now we have a mechanism. The beauty of this platform is that it respects sovereignty, but at the same time, it gives civil society a platform where everything now is measured. Now, we no longer say, oh, pre-trial detention and freedom. We can simply say recommendation 6.8 made by the United States as far as Article 87 bis 13 and 14, as far as undermining national unity, things of that nature. There are specific things that we mention now. It's gotten way more sophisticated at this point, and now it's being monitored, but not just from our end, on an international scale. This is why this is a good platform, because it kind of evens out the playing field a little bit. At the same time, civil society, we have to be reasonable and we have to do our homework. Not just, again, it's not just about who protested the most gets to be at the front to talk. It's not if they're earning it that way. It's through academic expertise and through work. And at this present point, we need basically people with tame temperament. And it's about diplomacy, and it's about getting things really done as far as work, action plan, blueprints. Now we're getting to the nitty-gritty. So it's a different type of focus of advocacy that we're getting. Keep in mind, noise making is the more is the type of advocacy that you get, that people get more funding for, but it's not necessarily the one that produces the most results. So keeping that in mind. All right, so remember, our objective now is to form a pragmatic plan for action for systematic breakdown of the recommendation to measurable, timely, pragmatic objectives and immediate action. It's a mouthload, but basically we have to take the recommendations, which one are appropriate for Algerians and which one are not. Keep in mind, this system is not obligatory by any means, shape, or form. It is in the nation's sovereign right to choose which recommendation they will take and which they will not take. On good note, Algeria seems to have a 50-50 portion. This is actually pretty good in comparison to other nations. Algerians don't just take any recommendation that's given to them. They actually genuinely decipher through them. You can quite see them. If some certain things are not appropriate or not religiously, they don't work with our religion, they don't work, then they're not accepted. Also, for example, recommendation of treaties. Treaties, they sound nice, but they place a country in a particular position. For example, the Treaty of Rome. Well, that treaty is international court, and that's a matter for another day that we will speak of. That's a very interesting treaty that Algeria should not sign. But there are different brackets of recommendations, and sometimes they just don't fit for Algerian public. Again, a nation does not take 291 recommendations made by foreign countries and imposes them on the people. That is not democratic. That does not induce an environment of human rights. We have to decipher through them. Again, we cannot simply say, let's take all the ones here. We have to stop with the generalities. We need to get specific. We take this recommendation, recommendation 6.8, recommendation 6.13, recommendation here, recommendation there. We have to be precise. Once we are precise, we have to create a pragmatic plan. We have to create a plan of action, something big, a blueprint, who is going to work, or even the main plan can be which organization is going to work with which institution to see this through. Organization is the first key. Also, they have to be measurable. So a lot of the recommendations are actually, you would think if diplomats made it, they would be good. They're actually not. They're not measurable at all. You have certain recommendations, for example, that involve three complete different fields. And so if you take that, it's like it's just not, they're not well designed. In essence, is it timely? Because you have to produce something that's measurable in time, because if again, like there are certain recommendations, I remember one on gender equality, which says improve the situation. Okay, how do you measure that situation? I mean, that's a matter of perspective. If you know, there just has to be, again, we have to agree on an exact system, an exact time plan. Those recommendations have to be then broken down to objectives. Within those objectives, broken down to immediate actions. There are certain things we can do now. There are other things that we need to sit down and discuss. Who's going to work with what? And that's the first step. And again, government has to be willing to do this, to work with civil society, and civil society has to be willing to do it. But in aspect, this is what we're talking. Now we're getting into the technical, we're getting into the blueprint. Advocacy, again, is being part of a human rights defender, being part of an organization is more than just the bad. It's more than the pointing out. You have to help find solutions. And again, this is where we need our academics. This is where we need our legal experts, so that we can talk about the pragmatic application.
Alrighty, so when we take a look at all the recommendations that were made for the UPR, here we have them nicely, placed them nicely in a spreadsheet for everybody. And I highly recommend that next time or anyone has an opinion that you ask them, well, show me the spreadsheet. Okay, so it is done by nations, who the nations recommended. It has two code. It has the draft code and it has the new final code. Reason being, for those of us who went to the UPR actually working group, is that there was a draft adaptation that was circulating, and then on the 16th there were an adaptation report that came out. The adaptation report that came out afterwards used, I'm sorry, the one that came out initially used these numbers, as you can see, 6.31, 6. Now it altered the code to, as you can see over here. The codes are not really alterations. The only thing that changed is perhaps grammar and some mistakes, but the recommendations are not, you cannot change them once you made them. So there are options on what people can do, what Algeria can do. It can either support or note. Rejection is not really an option, but sometimes is on extreme cases. And I also put the SDGs, is a Sustainable Development Goal. This is something else that they use to monitor human rights, and which ones it was. So it was my prerogative, if you will, to answer or to make the recommendations, not on the basis of simply being an organization, but with the mentality and the premise to truly represent Algerians in Algeria. And for that case, these are the recommendations that were prioritized. So nearly with everything you can see here, if we do this, and column stats, you will see that it was actually 239 were supported, 43 were noted, and 8 were rejected. And I will tell you why the ones that were rejected and what premise they were on. Okay, so let's get going. Our priorities for Algerians, or what is indicative from my research and from the surveys, is expression, release of detainees, and of course assembly, as far as also as media, and judicial system. So recommendations on those accounts were made priority. There is a realization that you cannot take on 291. Originally, it was 291 recommendations. Remember, as I mentioned in the presentation, Spain's recommendation that was in the draft report was mentioned twice. It was 6.219 and I believe 6.223 or something like that, but it was the same recommendation on gender equality and it was mentioned twice. That is why they had 291, but in essence now when we remove one, it's 290. So you can see which ones were recommended. There are still some recommendations that really stood out for their detail, and those were, of course, we have the United Kingdom, and on freedom of expression, and you also have, of course, the United States and Belgium. Belgium also was really good in its recommendations. So let's go down a little bit on priorities. Oh, there you go. So right here, the United States, you can see we really honestly have with all three exactly what we want, which is update association law and rights afforded in constitution and remove restrictions and funding. Basically in law 1206, you can again see exactly from the map that I had showed you with the objectives, with the recommendation, with the immediate actions, that if you provide details to states that way, that you will get results. And you can see here as well, repeal 87. So we do have 87, we do have a recommendation on exactly 87. We do have a recommendation on exactly the law for association. We do have a recommendation to exactly address our concerns with the extension of unlimited speech, and of the limitation of protected speech. Remember, we talked that is the issue. And then, of course, we have Article 95, which we talked about. We have false information, which we've seen over and over again. We've seen Provision 144 bis, which we talked about, 196 bis. So really, in all these three, we have quite a bit. We do have everything that we need, but they were not the only ones. You had some pretty good ones as well. From other nations. Some of them, of course, like Canada as well, also talked about pretrial detention. Right here also mentioning 123 of the procedural code, meaning that they know we have a code. We should really try to exercise this a little bit more. What else? We also had Belgium, if I can see. Yes, right here, Belgium was really good as well. It amends these provisions and it already has them all in line. 75, 96, 144, 196. So it actually mentions all of those. Belgium is another one that was really good. Australia as well mentioned some good ones. Keep in mind, this does go into the realm of geopolitics, and this is why not all recommendations were accepted. Unfortunately, our words were skewed in that they were mixed in in recommendations with allegations that are simply not true. So some people saw this as an opportunity. Another one that was rejected was Malta, as it kept talking about the minimum age of enrollment in defense forces 18. I believe the defense force is 19. This is based on misinformation. So in that case, this is rejected on that account. There is also these accounts, which is again talked about armed forces, children in armed conflict. Once more, we even have a confirmation from the UN that this is not existing in Algeria. So again, this is geopolitics really rendering, coming out once more. Another one is minimum age of marriage. There is a minimum age of marriage. These are only under certain unusual circumstances, so evidently not understanding really the law. So again, this was rejected. And one more time here, again, for the defense forces to be 18, that already is the case. So clearly misinformation that has been passing around. Now, the recommendations all up here that were priority are not the only ones supported. As you can see, several of them are supported, but the ones that are given priority were the ones that reflected best their survey. Okay. So that is it for this presentation as far as the UPR. Next, I would like to show you what we had talked about, what I had mentioned with the stakeholders report and the unfortunate misrepresentation, why I had made such allegations. So get ready for that one. We're literally going to take UN documentation and legal documentation and just highlight piece by piece. Again, once more, thank you so much for joining. Please subscribe and feel free to comment or ask me any questions that you'd like. I will also be putting down the sources, putting the links, just bear with me a little bit as I have to put them on the website myself so I can actually give you guys the link. And please get into that habit. Honestly, always ask me where did I get that information, and always ask everyone where is the spreadsheet. It's not just showing it to you, it's having access to it as well. That's very important. So once more, thank you very much for your time and happy advocacy.